Grace and mercy and peace are yours from God our Father, through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. God's word for our sermon meditation this morning is the gospel lesson that was already read from John chapter 13, verses 31 through 35. I won't reread it now, but I'll ask you to refer back to those words to see what Jesus was saying to his original disciples and his disciples from the 21st century as well. Dear brothers and sisters in the faith, May is the month of graduations galore. And we know that every graduation ceremony has a featured speaker, either from the class itself or from the outside world, whose job is to tell the graduates to take everything they learned over the last 4 years and inspire them to use that to strive for success in their next stage of life. Back in 2014, the United States Navy Admiral William McRaven delivered a very memorable graduation speech in which he encouraged the graduates of the University of Texas to go out and change the world. But he said in order to do that, they needed to remember 10 basic life lessons. And to every one of those 10 life lessons, he connected an illustration or an experience that he had during his training to be a Navy SEAL. He said that one of his first memories from that basic training was that he and all the recruits had to make their beds perfectly every single morning. But making their beds every day taught them the life lesson to get up every day and strive to complete one task. Let that motivate you to complete another task and another and another. And at the end of the day, even if the day was horrible, you can go to bed and sleep well, knowing that you completed one thing. You did one thing very well. In a sense, the words before us this morning are part of Jesus' graduation speech, which he delivered in the upper room on the night before his death. His disciples had sat at his feet and learned his teachings for the last 3 years. But now he revealed that he was about to take his visible presence from them. And he was going to send them off to literally change the world with the gospel message. Since you and I are also Jesus' disciples by faith, that's his charge to us as well. But in order for us to change the world, he first says we have to remember the one basic lesson of love. And in these verses, Jesus talks to us about God's love for us, as well as our love for one another. Judas had just left the upper room where Jesus and the 12 had gathered to celebrate the Passover meal. Sometime during the course of the meal, Jesus announced that one of them was going to betray him that very night. And he said it would be the one to whom he gave a piece of bread after it was dipped into a bitter herb sauce. Jesus handed the bread to Judas and said, "What you are about to do quickly." While everybody else in the room was clueless as to what was happening, Jesus knew exactly what Judas was up to, what he was planning to do. And Jesus knew what Judas's treacherous act was going to mean for him. It would mean suffering, agony, excruciating pain, humiliation, and finally an agonizing death on the cross. But instead of crying out, "Oh, woe is me, what am I going to do?" Jesus started talking about glory that would be brought to him as well as to his heavenly Father. You see, as soon as Judas left that room, God's plan of salvation shifted into high gear. For some money, 30 pieces of silver to be exact, Judas went out and informed the Jewish leaders as to Jesus' whereabouts, so that later that night they could capture him and drag him into court. And that would result in the most inhumane punishment ever inflicted on any human being in the history of the world. Jesus would be tied to a post and whipped until he was half dead. He would be ridiculed and mocked and scorned and spit on. He would have nails driven into his hands and feet and a spear thrust upward into his side. He was going to give his Son over to divine anger and punishment. Now we hear that and we automatically think, oh, poor Jesus. How awful, how terrible, and how sad for him. He had a different take on it. He said, now is the Son of Man glorified, and God has glorified him. We have to remember that Jesus' whole reason for coming into the world, his reason for being born, was to die. His death would not be the result of any sins he committed, but it would be the result of him offering himself as a sacrifice for all the sinners of the world, in place of all the sinners of the world. He was given the name Jesus, which means he saves, or Savior. He came into the world to save all sinners from the curse and consequences of their sins. But that work required his suffering and death. His suffering was just about to commence. Everything that he came to do was about to be done. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and death is how he would do that. Think of what that means for you and me. That means Jesus sacrificed himself for us, people who are not even worthy to be saved, according to human standards. Because the Bible makes it perfectly clear that we are born steeped in sin. We're natural enemies of God. We are completely ignorant and hostile and blind to God's will and ways. And over the course of our lifetime, we show that in 1,000 different ways, don't we? But yet God sent his Son into the world to save us. When we start to ponder that salvation, it's kind of hard to figure out who we should admire and thank more. Is it the Son, Jesus, for voluntarily giving his life over to such a horrific death for such horrific people? Or is it the willingness of his heavenly Father, who handed his Son over to such a gruesome death for such ridiculous people? Really, it's both. Both the Father and the Son deserve our worship and praise and honor and glory. And that is exactly why Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. But we can't even talk about love for either God or Jesus without first talking about our need for God's love. All talk about God's love and forgiveness is premature, and it's unappreciated unless we first talk about our sin and our need for God's love and forgiveness. Jesus did that indirectly with his disciples in the upper room when he called them my children. They were as dear and precious to him as little children are dear and precious to their own parents. But Jesus also knew that they were acting like little children that night. He was speaking to men who should have known better, but who had just finished arguing about which of them was the best and who was going to land the best job in Christ's corporate kingdom here on earth. He was talking to two men who were known for their violent tempers, and to one man who later on that very night was going to deny having any affiliation with Jesus whatsoever. He was talking to 12 men who should have known better, but couldn't get past their own egos, so they weren't willing to stoop down and do the work of a servant, washing each other's feet. So Jesus did it for them. Jesus saw the danger in their sin, which is why he never failed to remind them about their sins. But at the same time, he always restated his purpose for coming into the world, for them, to pay for their sins and the sins of the whole world, to save everybody. In this lesson, Jesus made it clear, or Jesus knew that his disciples were very closely connected in his visible presence. So he informed them that he was about to leave them, take his visible presence away from them. It didn't mean that he was abandoning them or deserting them, ditching them, or that he wouldn't love them anymore. On a previous occasion, he told the unbelieving Jews that because of their lack of faith in him, they would never be able to go where he was going. Here he said the disciples couldn't come either, at least not yet. But one day they could, and they would. Jesus went to the cross alone to pay for their sins. He rose from the dead and returned to his Father in heaven to prepare that heavenly home for them. And one day, when he chose to come back, he would take them to be with him where he was. All in spite of how they acted. All in spite of their sins and their acting like petulant little children. That's really what the message of the gospel is all about. In a world where sin is so obvious and evident, every time you turn around and everywhere you look, there's always more grace and forgiveness from God to cover and forgive the most heinous sins. God lives to and loves to forgive the sins of penitent sinners. At the same time, he doesn't allow us to just keep on going our own headstrong way, to continue living in our sins and love every minute of it. Instead, he gives us his law, which makes our sins clear to us, so that we can turn to him in repentance, and then in love, with his forgiveness, we can strive to live our lives according to his will. In the second half of this lesson, Jesus gives one general way in which we can show our love for him. He says, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." And that's exactly what his disciples went on to do. In fact, some of the unbelieving writers at that time even talked about the mutual love that Christians showed to each other. One writer said they loved each other even without being acquainted with each other. So these Christians didn't even know each other, and they showed this self-sacrificing love. Just so that there's no confusion or misunderstanding, we have to remember what love isn't and what it is. Love is not a feeling or an emotion, something that we fall into, like falling into a ditch. To God, love is a doing, an action, a self-sacrificial giving to the other person without expecting anything in return, just like God did for us when he gave his one and only Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins and the sins of the whole world. Therefore, God tells us in the Bible, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, and it keeps no record of wrongs. If love were a feeling and an emotion, Jesus would not be able to say, you must love one another. Because how can you order somebody to feel a certain way? But since love is an action, a doing, Jesus can definitely say, you must love one another. A number of decades ago, a song was written that says, what the world needs now is love. Sweet love. That is just as true today as it was the day it was written. But if that's the case, and everybody knows what the world needs now is love, how come there is such a pitiful lack of love in our world, in our marriages, our families, and even in our Christian congregations? Since our love for one another stems from God's love for us and our appreciation of that love, could it be that our failure to love one another is directly tied to our failure to learn and understand and appreciate God's love for us? When our God says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, how can we so often look for every excuse under the sun to skip out on the one day a week set aside when Christians come together to publicly worship him? When Jesus tells us to daily search the scriptures that testify about him, how many of you do personal devotions or Bible reading at home? Every Sunday in the bulletin, there's a little reminder to pick up a free copy of the Meditations or the Forward to Christ magazine that are on that table in the lobby. But I've noticed that at the end of every one of those periods, either the month for the Forward to Christ or the end of the Meditations period, that stack never really seems to diminish all that much. When our God tells us to bring up our children in the training and instruction of the Lord, do we do that? Not just at church, but at home too. Do we hold daily devotions with them? Pray with them regularly? Do we even ask about what they learned in Sunday school, review that lesson with them? Is it any wonder then that there is such an amazing lack of love among us? But that's exactly why God's love for us is so incredibly amazing. St. Paul wrote, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Without any inclination from us, without any evidence that we were going to respond to his love, with the knowledge that most people in the world will never respond to his love, Jesus still came into the world to die for everyone and paid for everyone's sins. That's love, don't you think? And that's the kind of love that we who do believe in him as our Savior, that's the kind of love that we want to show to one another. So what does that Christian love look like on a daily basis? Well, Christian children are going to gladly unload the dishwasher or take out the garbage or clean their room without asking their parents, why do you want me to do this? And Christian siblings are going to share their possessions without grabbing everything within an arm's length and saying, this is mine. Christian spouses are going to share household duties instead of thinking and saying to each other, this is the stuff that you do, dear, and this is the stuff that I do. They will love and treat each other kindly. They're going to look for opportunities to do things with each other, even though one person in the relationship doesn't necessarily like that evening's or that day's activity. And they are certainly going to freely forgive one another's hurtful words and actions. In a Christian congregation, brothers and sisters are going to show love to one another by wanting to get to know everybody's names and a whole lot more about each other. They're going to want to share their joys and sorrows and burdens with one another. They are going to gladly give a portion of their time and talents and treasures to the church, not only to honor their Savior, but also to help out the other members of the congregation so that the congregation can be spiritually healthy. Christian love means that we are going to love one another, not just in words, but in actions and in truth, without expecting anything in return from the other person. As we love each other like Christ loved us, it's not only going to honor our Savior and build up his body of believers, but it's going to be a very clear sign to the people around us. This is what his disciples are like. This is a little glimpse of Christ himself. And hopefully, they will want to know how they can get in on that love action as well. Demonstrating that kind of self-sacrificing love to one another is inspirational and easy to talk about. And it's a lot harder to put that into action, isn't it? In fact, there is never going to be a point in this life when we can perfectly love one another. Which is why Jesus' words in this lesson were a graduation speech only in the sense that his original disciples were no longer going to study at his physical feet, but they always had to keep on studying and learning his word. And the same goes for these disciples. As we continue to review the basic lesson of love, God's love toward us, we're going to daily be renewed in our desire and ability to show that same kind of love to each other. God grant that for Jesus' sake. Amen. And may the peace of God that goes beyond our understanding guard and keep our hearts and minds until